I'm Nina Gopal. Welcome to Global Express, where we dissect developments that impact India. This week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Washington has been the most talked about event in a long time. French President Emmanuel Macron has talked up Trump's strategic disruption of Europe after Trump's telephone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin ahead of the Munich Security Conference raised the prospect of the war coming to an end to Russia's territorial advantage. But it was Narendra Modi becoming only the fourth world leader to be invited by US President Donald Trump less than 3 weeks after he took office, who has set off a buzz across the world. There wasn't the usual pomp of a state visit. This was all about business. But despite all the brouhaha in the run up to the visit about how the Donald was going to press Prime Minister Modi to lower tariffs, he called India the tariff king in his first term and pressed for India to import more American goods and reverse the trade deficit. Trump seemed to have realized that while he could push through deals that could benefit America, he had to keep India on his side. He could not alienate India. The pictures shared by the Trump team of the two leaders in a bear hug, of Trump pulling out a chair for Modi to sit on, repeatedly prodding the press to ask Modi questions, and raining compliments on Modi being a better negotiator only added to the hype. And the same was true of Modi. Modi didn't hold back either. During the joint briefing with Trump, he took off on Trump's signature slogan, Make America Great Again, saying India's vision was to make India great again. And he actually said when America and India work together, this MAGA plus MEGA becomes a mega partnership for prosperity. But one of the biggest takeaways was Trump's announcement that he and Modi had reached an important agreement on energy that would restore the United States as a leading supplier of gas and oil and gas to India, with Trump saying hopefully they become their number one supplier. Now, India's top supplier right now is currently Russia. The US only comes fifth in a long line. So the big question, are we going to see a shift in India's much wanted policy of strategic autonomy? What happens to India's reliance on Russia as its main supplier of cheap, affordable oil, as its main supplier of defense equipment, and the projection by most analysts that US sanctions on the Russia shadow fleet are going to kick in. So India probably could manage this pivot to US for more oil. But there's more. Trump said the US would increase military sales to India by many billions of dollars. He was paving the way, of course, to ultimately provide India with F-35 stealth fighters. He's talked about a 10-year defense framework to allow easy purchase of defense goods and services, joint defense production, nuclear plants for energy. So his aim, I think the both sides' aim, is to double bilateral trade to almost US 500 billion by 2030. Monti also made quite a statement when he said on the Russia-Ukraine war that he was not on anyone's side, but on the side of peace. And then there was the American promised extradition to India of the Mumbai bomb blast terrorist, Tawahir Rana, not David Headley, the real intelligence asset. So to take us through this delicate balancing act that India will have to now embark on in handling a Trump who puts business first before even long-standing alliances like NATO, is former ambassador to the United States, Arun Singh. Ambassador Singh served as the Indian ambassador to the United States from 2015 to 2016. He's now a non-resident senior fellow with Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and senior fellow at Asia program at the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He was also our ambassador to Israel and France. Welcome, Ambassador Singh.
Thanks, Nita.
Also with us is well-known award-winning former journalist Maya Mirchandani. Ms. Mirchandani heads the Department of Media Studies at India's premier liberal arts institution, Ashoka University. She moved to research and teaching after over 2 decades with NDTV. Maya has won multiple awards, the prestigious Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism twice, the Red Ink Award for Reporting on Human Rights, as well as the Exchange for Media Broadcast Journalism Award for Best International Affairs Reporting. She's now working on a political biography of the Abdullahs of Kashmir. Welcome, Ms. Maya Mirchandani. So let's start with the big question, Ambassador. Has India abandoned its policy of strategic autonomy for a closer alliance with the US at the expense of its ties with Russia? Is there a shift? Because, I mean, Russian President Vladimir Putin and the US President Donald Trump do have a rapport. and so do Trump and Modi. So will it give Modi enough wiggle room to keep India's ties with Russia as well as the US on an even keel?
So, Nina, to respond directly to your very specific question, India has no option but to maintain its policy of strategic autonomy. Because as I've mentioned on several occasions, no country takes a foreign policy decision to help another country. They take a decision based on their perception of their interest or the political leader's perception of where their political interests lie. So you cannot have 100% convergence between the foreign policies of any two countries. Secondly, if you're looking at the United States, we have seen that every 4 years or every 8 years, the policies of the administration change, depending on who won, because there is deep polarization in US society. So it would be awkward to hitch your bandwagon to entirely to one political party or one kind of political leader or one country at a time when their policies are going to shift. US, for example, in the Democratic administrations has looked at policies dealing with climate change, and President Trump has walked out repeatedly from the Paris Climate Agreement. US went into Afghanistan and wanted everybody to support their effort in Afghanistan. And one fine day, they decided that they were leaving Afghanistan, unmindful of the consequences of the countries in their region or their friends and partners. Therefore, everybody has to factor in that you have to take your own foreign policy decisions based on your interests. Where there is convergence, you work together. Where there isn't convergence, you work to protect your interests. So given that, clearly, US is a very important partner for India. If I look at India's comprehensive national interest, US is our largest trading partner, largest source of investment in India, largest destination for Indian investment in any foreign country. At 5.2 million, the largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora. At 300,000, largest single country presence of Indian students in universities. So it's a very important partner, technology partner. But you need to hedge also against US decisions that sometimes may not work in your favor. And in the broader global context, India's relationship with France, which is a part of the broader Western alliance system, is a very strong partnership. Enables India to hedge. And similarly, the relationship with Russia will remain a very important relationship, enabling India to hedge when some of the decisions taken by the US or the West in general are not in keeping with India's interests.
Ambassador, I do want to ask you. I mean, this India is it being pressured to buy American oil and gas? I mean, do we have a choice? Because is India actually going to do what Trump said at that presser?
So it's nothing new. It's nothing new. In the first Trump administration, already there was an articulation from the US that India should buy more energy from the US. And at that time, India had ratcheted up its energy purchases from the US to the tune of about $6 billion. Today, I understand India is buying almost $15 billion worth of energy supplies from the US. Now the US wants to take it up to $25 billion. Now, if energy is available from the US and it's cost competitive, why not? The energy supplies globally are fungible. It's a cost competitive market. And even, you refer to the fact that today Russia is the largest source of energy for India. But this is something that happened only in the last 2 or 3 years. Because before that, India was hardly buying any energy from Russia. But when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started and sanctions on European purchase of Russian energy came in, Europeans picked up energy from the Gulf market, which was India's source of supply, and Russian energy was available at a discount. And therefore, India did that for its own energy security. So it was a response to the situation.
Yeah. Maya, if I can bring you in, is there a convergence of India and US's strategic interests on intelligence sharing? I mean, what can we conclude from this? The Prime Minister had a set of meetings with the Trump team, most notably this Director of Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who's of Hawaiian origin, but is a Hindu and a friend of Modi's. I mean, Ram Madhav apparently was sent to attend her wedding with gifts from Modi. So will this lay the ground for greater intelligence sharing? There's talk of ISIS, there's talk of Pakistan continuing to be a terror haven, there's talk of course, now this extradition, the promised extradition of the 26/11 Mumbai blast perpetrator Tawahir Rana. I mean, although he's a Canadian of Pakistani origin, So while that may or may not have its uses, shouldn't we be pushing for the extension of David Headley? I mean, he's the real man behind the Mumbai attacks. So, I mean, now if I can take the question a little further, since you're an expert in that field, one hears that Delhi may be making moves to ensure that Trump isn't tempted to interfere in Jammu and Kashmir as he did the last time he was in power. Do you see that as behind the move? Maya, of Delhi's moves to mend fences with the Mirwais Omar Farooq?
You've asked me many questions in one, Nina. So
True.
let me try and take that bit by bit. So first of all, I mean, Tahawur Rana's extradition, while it's significant, and I'm sure the Indian security establishment is grateful, there was very interesting reference that Trump made about how they're going to be sending him back. They're going to be sending him back. And the question in my mind was, back where? I mean,
Exactly.
he's Canadian of Pakistani origin. He's wanted in India for one of the worst terror attacks in recent memory. And so there is value in that. But, it's also been in the making. Why didn't Trump do this in 2016 when he was president at that time? The extradition requests have been pending since 2008. I mean, let's not kid ourselves as well. And as you pointed out, why not David Headley? And we all know the kind of murky answers to that. Ambassador Singh probably knows them better than I could, ever imagine. I think post 2019 and post the abrogation of Article 370, I'm not so sure Trump is going to want to meddle in Jammu and Kashmir politics, because as far as India is concerned as well, this is all now a new phase of India's own domestic relationship with Jammu and Kashmir. So I'm going to park that for the time being. But I think what is interesting, and what the Indian establishment did get a little prickly about, from my understanding, is the fact that he offered to mediate between India and China. I think
Yes.
that was possibly more interesting. And that begs a whole different range of questions. One is, of course, on the security front and the border issue, and sort of the strategic tussle between India and China for Asian dominance. The second is, what is Trump's intention for suggesting this vis-a-vis global trade and the global economy and America's economic interests vis-a-vis China as well? Where is he going with China and Russia? And I think that's a bigger geostrategic question that impacts not just India, but the entire international community. And he's making very different noises from the Biden administration as far as that's concerned. We've heard him make this offer of mediation on China. We don't know why he suggested it. What is in America's interest to suggest it? And I think that's the point Ambassador Singh was making. Nobody is doing this for the benefit of the other. They're doing this for the perceived benefit to themselves. Trump is a businessman. He makes deals. And I think even the Indian foreign affairs, diplomatic establishment is conscious of that aspect of Trump's personality. So
I mean,
my guess is
that is true.
My guess is that he's going to be meddling or constantly raising the India-China dispute much more than the India-Pakistan dispute. That's the sense I get, and there's a larger game there at play.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ambassador Singh, if I can come back to you, that question that Maya brought up about this, about China. I mean, are we an unspoken alliance partner really against China? I mean, President Xi Jinping is someone that Trump has showered praise on too. I mean, he did say he was a friend until COVID happened, and Modi has made some very, the Prime Minister has made some very he spelled out what he wants out of COVID. He said we'll work together to enhance peace and stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific. And he says the Quad will play a very special role in this. But that four-way grouping has Japan and Australia physically present and targeted by China. I mean, just day before yesterday, I think, or was it last night, I read a piece about how China attacked an Australian fighter jet, and how Australia has reacted very angrily to China's claims over the South China Sea. So have we committed to align against China by by joining Quad and now hosting a Quad summit later this year? Is it just noise or is it really something that matter? Because Trump has said that India is a critical part of our Indo-Pacific strategy.
Nina, if you see the first 4 visitors who've been invited by President Trump after he was inaugurated, you had the Prime Minister of Israel, the Prime Minister of Japan, the King of Jordan, and now the Prime Minister of India. I think that's a signal of the priorities and focus of the incoming administration. So you have the West Asia challenge, and secondly, elements of the Quad, the Indo-Pacific. And in all the statements, messages that are coming out, it is a signal that the incoming administration continues to place some focus on the China challenge. Mm. If you take a look at the statement that the new US Defense Secretary made in Europe recently at a convening of the Ukraine Assistance Group, where US, which was the chairman, now says it will not chair, but will only be a member. But in that statement, he says clearly that European countries now have to step up to look after their defense, and that for Ukraine, if any troops have to be provided to monitor a peace agreement that may be worked out, it will be European troops, not American troops. And then there is a paragraph to say that US has to pay attention elsewhere. US is dealing with the challenge of a peer competitor, which is China in the Indo-Pacific, and that's what the US needs to focus on. So one can see how US is defining its current challenge and priorities. Now, that having been said, it is clear from all that has emerged so far that there is a division within the Trump team on the policy towards China. The National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State are people who are seen as China hawks and have articulated the China challenge clearly. On the economic side, you have Elon Musk, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Commerce Secretary Designate Howard Lutnick. These are people heavily invested in the China relationship. And they will want a slightly different approach to China. Even in the first Trump term, for the first time in American administration, in the national security strategy, national defense strategy, had clearly articulated that China was a strategic rival. They needed to deal with the challenge from China. And at the same time, when Trump was meeting President Xi at the margins of a G20 meeting in 2019, and according to the John Bolton, the national security advisor, Trump said that if you buy more farm produce from us, I will soften the pressure on China. Yeah. And then in January 2020, he did
the same tactic.
Yeah, same tactic, transactional. And then in January 2020, he did a limited phase 1 trade agreement with China because he needed to signal domestically that he was getting China to buy more from the US when everybody knew that China was not going to do it. So we can expect that to some extent, there will be an attempt to get trade concessions from China. At the same time, there is a recognition of China being a major economic, technological, military competitor. And as the Americans have said, the only country with the intent and capability to replace the US in the international system. Now, that having been said, whatever be the US posture or articulation related to China, they see China as a very, very important competitor. And at the same time, the US wants to maintain its preeminent role in the global context, whatever may be the other challenge. In that framework, they see India, another country with 1.4 billion people, proven strength in tech, skilled human capital. You know, for example, 20% of the global talent for semiconductor design today is in India. So American companies recognize that to maintain their global lead in innovation and to maintain their global lead vis-a-vis China, they need India as a partner.
That's very interesting because we all know that China's semiconductor industry owes everything to the US propping it up. I mean, that was the whole point of it in the beginning. And are they trying then to build India up as a competitor in that field as well to China?
And well, not only that field. You know, in the Biden administration, for example, a major new initiative on critical and emerging technologies was started, talking about partnership in artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotech, semiconductors, space. And after that initiative, there were major progress in cooperation, semiconductors, defense, and space, something that had not happened earlier. And you can see value of that initiative because in the Trump administration, They obviously don't want to be seen to be doing anything that the Biden administration had done.
Yeah.
Yes.
But in the India-US joint statement, the ISET initiative continues, although under a new name. Now it is called Trust, Transforming
Yes.
Relationship Utilizing Strategic Technology. But if you
That's
see the
right.
description, it's just ISET by another name.
That's a very interesting point. I don't think that's been caught on by anyone. Maya, if I can come back to you on this Trump's tariff threat. I mean, he'd announced plans for reciprocal tariffs on goods imports from all the trading partners and singled India out as a very hard place to do business because of the tariffs. He's also said that, I mean, for India, that challenge is going to hit us because the new tariffs come into effect by the 1st of April. And even in our own budget, we seem to have sort of preempted Trump by reducing and cutting tariffs on American goods down to 11% and 13%. So have we dodged the tariff shocks, or do you think and why are we pandering? We've cut the tariffs to please America. What else are we going to do to please America on that front?
So I think, look, everyone's very conscious of the fact that the economic situation in India needs some kind of attention. And it's also, the markets and all, they're intrinsically tied with global trade. So there's no question of getting out of what Trump is going to do in terms of disruptive policy announcements as far as trade is concerned. Yes, to answer your question, to some extent, we seem to have preempted what was coming and at least have made an attempt to dodge the tariff bullet. It doesn't mean that we're going to dodge it. I think it depends on what next Trump is going to do. But Trump himself, if you notice, he makes these announcements of tariffs and then 48 hours later, he might roll them back a little bit. He'll reduce the
Yeah.
amount. He'll delay the timeline. He will give them a window by which to cooperate. I mean, there are various permutations and combinations that he's worked out, including with his own neighbors in North America. So,
That's right.
and I mean, really interestingly, as an aside, hats off to the Mexican president for having taken him on that particular issue. But I think, like I said before, Nina, I mean, he's a businessman, he's a deal maker. He's come in and won the US election on the back of, promises made to, middle America, white America, about jobs, about the economy. But I think where tariffs is going to be very interesting as far as Trump is concerned is not what it means for India and, Europe and other trading partners, but what it's going to mean for the internal US domestic market. That's something that we are not really paying attention to because it doesn't impact us. But it will impact us when it means that the same person who's won an election the way he has, coming back after a gap, is going to be not able to keep the promises he's made. High tariffs will mean that the cost of those tariffs of goods coming into the US are going to be passed on to the consumer. The visa restrictions that he's talking about, the high cost of wages that's going to lead to, is going to be passed on to the consumer. The American consumer is far too used to walking into a wholesale store like Costco or Walmart and picking up, vast quantities of everyday things at throwaway prices because they come in
Yes.
cheaply, they're made by cheap labor, the cost of manufacturing is cheap, etc. When that starts to hit the American voter because of these very policies, I think nobody's paying attention to that right now because everyone is so caught up in the moment of how Trump is going to show the world that America is going to call the shots on global trade. America is going to call the shots on immigration. America is going to call the shots on, any number of things. But how is that going to ultimately impact and manifest domestically in the US is something that's going to start becoming his reality sooner rather than later.
That's a very good point, actually. Now, on military sales and defense ties, Ambassador, I mean, Trump announced that US was going to increase military sales to India by many billions of dollars. He said that they're going to supply India with F-35 stealth fighters, fifth generation stealth fighters, which had been offered to 19 countries, and Turkey got kicked out because they had the Russia's S-400 missile defense system. But so does India. So I mean, and India is, I mean, for India, Russia remains its top source of defense supplies, although it's dropped from 62% to 34%. We look more and more at the US and, as you said, France and others. So what is this going to be? I mean, don't you think that there'll be the same old bureaucratic hurdles, the same old, this issue of, sensitive transfer of sensitive technology coming in the way? Is it really going to be able to benefit from all this talk about, striker aircraft and drones and all of which they were talking about at the press conference?
So Nina, as you mentioned, traditionally, Soviet Union, then Russia has been the main supplier of defense equipment to India. But that process has changed with the diversification starting 1990, when we saw the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And today we have four major defense partners. There's Russia, there's Israel, there's France, and there's United States. And we do significant purchases also from Israel and France. And if you look at the US, it's not something new. Right? Till 2008, we hardly bought any defense supplies from the US because there were severe restrictions on high-level technology transfers to India.
Exactly.
But by now, we have contracted to buy more than $24 billion of defense supplies from the US. And some very important platforms, the P-8I for maritime reconnaissance, C-130, C-17 for long-haul transport, have been found to be very, very useful by India. And then not just supplies from the US, both are now looking also at co-development of technology.
Yes, that's right.
As part of the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, a new mechanism, IndusX, India-US Defense Acceleration Ecosystem, bringing together startups in defense technology of both countries to co-develop technology, was started. And in fact, it's interesting that the Trump administration, while moving away from the ISET nomenclature, has not moved away from the IndusX nomenclature. There is a mention in the joint statement of IndusX, which was something started in the Biden administration. And building on IndusX, they've started something new called Indus Innovation, bringing together startups for co-development of technology in other areas, including energy and space. And the US has also authorized technology transfer for the GE414 engine. They say
That's
80%
right.
technology transfer, more than what they have done to any other partner of the US. Now, on the F-35 itself, it's interesting that the president said it, and he's done similar things in the past. But if you saw the briefing by the Indian Foreign Secretary, he said that there is no request for proposal as yet. So this is not something
Yeah.
India has asked for as yet. So the Indian system
It's
has to
being
work its
offered
way.
without being asked.
He was to show a willingness that I'm willing to do more in terms of the kind of technology access that they will give to the industry. It's a good political signal. Again, going back to the first Trump term, during one of Prime Minister's visits, in the joint statement, there was a reference to the fact that US would now agree to supply armed drones to India. Now, that was something that earlier administrations were not willing to do, given their technology transfer restriction. So here he was signaling that he wanted to take it to a higher level. And following from that, India has now contracted to buy 31, the MQ-9B drones from the US. So it's a signal he has given. Now, of course, both systems have to decide whether they want to go down that path or look for something else.
Then the other big story, big point that they made was about this, which Modi himself brought up, was that they were not only wanting to double bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. He's also talked about a mutually beneficial trade agreement. Now, this is something that Trump has always skirted around. I mean, India has wanted this trade agreement for a very long time. Am I right? And Ambassador, have you worked on it? I mean,
I think since Trump 1.0, and you saw that in the Biden administration, the US has not really been wanting fresh trade agreements. And with India, what they tried to do in his first term was a very limited trade agreement. But even that could not materialize because of existing interests on both sides and unwillingness of both sides to make the kind of concessions that the other side needed. But at this stage, it has become a very important mechanism because the US, as you mentioned just before the Prime Minister's visit, announced that they're going to work on reciprocal tariffs. And the only way for India to ward that off is by entering in some kind of a limited trade agreement with the US. Because once you do a trade agreement, then India can make the point that now that we have a trade agreement, There's no need for you to do reciprocal tariffs. And then don't have to deal with that challenge. So they have said that they will work towards a trade agreement. And by the fall of this year, they will try and do a first tranche of that trade agreement. And also, Trump is scheduled to visit India in the fall for a possible Quad summit. So before that, they can do something. I think it will enable both sides to move away from the need for any kind of reciprocal trade agreement, tariff arrangement.
Tariff agreement. Yeah, that's very interesting. Maya, on the issue of illegal immigration, I mean, India allowed this extremely harsh deportation of Indian illegals on February 5th. And there's another flight landing in Amritsar, I think, any day now, this weekend.
Landed, I think.
So
Overnight, yeah.
Modi is landed. So Modi says India completely supports Trump's efforts to reduce illegal immigration. He says that anybody who enters another country illegally, has absolutely no right in that country. Firstly, I think the way the immigrants were treated, the fact that they were handcuffed and put in that the transport plane, was I think created a lot of noise in India. But was this the right thing to do? I mean, he says any verified Indian who's in the US illegally, we're fully prepared to take them back. I mean, is this going to have a knock-on effect on other I mean, there must be so many Indians whose paperwork must be in the air. I mean, H-1B visas, wives, children, all of this. Do you think it's going to, be difficult
I
going
think the
forward?
immigration issue is a highly political one in America right now. Why Prime Minister Modi was one of the first actually to say yes, we'll take back anybody who's been there illegally. Said that. I mean, I think it's very clear that he's trying to establish a very close working relationship with Donald Trump, and this is a very emotive issue, and so it's an easy thing to do. I think what possibly the government did not expect were the conditions that they were sent back in, and there were noises that were made about that. I think the MEA did raise it with the US administration, and from what my understanding is, the next flight has seen a change in the conditions that they've been brought back in. But look, there's no right answer to this, Nina. I mean, every country is going to say that illegal immigration is a problem. Whether it is in Europe, whether it is in America, whether it's in Australia, whether it is in India. I mean, we hear the same kind of noises over here. Now, the challenge of immigration is to determine under what conditions those people have come. Are they? I mean, there's different classifications of the movement of people. Are they refugees? Are they migrants? Are they displaced? What's causing the movement? So there are political refugees, there are asylum seekers, there are people on work visas, there are people who are climate refugees, there are people who are drug mules from Latin America and going into the United States. So there's a whole different section and different ways to deal with the immigration question. I think what's interesting when it comes to India and the immigration question, and this is again reflective of domestic American politics, the question of illegal immigration from India also has no sympathy amongst the nearly 4 million strong Indian diaspora in the United States.
Is that right?
Yeah. And the reason is that the people who are out of the 4.5 million, I think about maybe 3 million roughly are citizens, and another fraction of that votes and things like that. So because their argument is they've come here the hard way, they have followed all laws and procedures, and these illegal immigrants are coming in and giving India a bad name. Also, mind you, that a lot of these legal Indian origin people are naturalized Americans, are people on H-1B visas, student visas, whatever kind of visa arrangements that they have, strongly in favor of the American system, but also very much pro Narendra Modi when it comes to their politics of the United States versus India. I mean, it's almost a little schizophrenic in many ways. So they have a position on illegal immigration. They are supporters of Prime Minister Modi in India, even if they may not be necessarily all Republican voters. So it's like walking a tightrope, I think,
True.
on many of these issues. So I think the immigration question, I think, for the United States had much more resonance when it came to Latin America and Hispanic countries, because that's the open, porous border, and other nationalities who came in from the north, coming in from the Canada side. So, I mean, as another sovereign nation who has strong reciprocal visa arrangements with the rest of the world, has its own position on citizenship, migration, refugees, etc. I don't see what other position India could have probably taken. Could they have said, no, these are not our people and we won't accept them? No, unlikely.
You can't.
So possibly it's the mature thing to have done, because this is otherwise going to blow up.
That's right.
And you need to work with America to do. But I want to just come back very quickly to one thing that we were talking about on the trade front. And I mean, apart from trade, the question of bringing American money into India, and
Yeah.
American investment, and making American entrepreneurs feel that their investments in India will be worthwhile, and etc., etc. And tech is that big space. I mean, we're not talking about, so I just wanted to bring it up, that bizarre meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Elon Musk.
No,
He,
I was going to bring that up.
yeah,
With
but
his two,
but
with his wife and his nannies
but
and
I mean,
babies.
I want Ambassador Singh to actually tell us what he thought of that image, where when you zoom out, on the one side, you have every top bureaucrat on the Indian establishment. On the other side, you have Musk with his wife and his two kids. And Trump backtracked and said he did not
And
meet
the nannies, Maya.
he did not meet him as a government official. He met him as a private businessman, but using US government premises to hold that meeting. The setting was that of a formal government meeting. That's one. Secondly, Elon Musk is trying to push Starlink and his technologies into India. There is a pushback from Indian, whether you want to use the term oligarchs or businessmen or whatever you want to use, against
Yes,
Elon Musk. And many of these people are incredibly tied in with the Indian political system. If they are going to say, no, you cannot give Indian spectrum out, how are we going to negotiate this where your own industry, your own business people are going to have a problem with Trump's right-hand man?
that's true. The
How
shadow president, so to speak.
I mean, it's like, you wake up every morning to say, what are the headlines going to be today out of the United States? Because it just seems to get, while on the one hand, you can say this is a strategic relationship, it's been building in this direction for the last, since the turn of the 21st century, perhaps a little earlier than that. And it's come to this point because both India and the US realize that it's in both interests to be strategic partners than to not be strategic partners. But then you have these disruptors. I mean, Ambassador Singh is smiling very quietly over there, but I'm actually asking you the question here.
No, it's a very good question. It was going to be asked. I was going to say it's equally intriguing to see Modi's meeting
Yes,
with Elon
but
Musk, the
I
shadow
don't know what to
president.
make of that
Please,
image.
Ambassador Singh, do tell us what you thought
No,
of
it's
that
not
meeting.
intriguing at all. If the meeting had not happened, all of you would be saying, but he went there, didn't meet Elon Musk, who is very powerful, and therefore it was a wasted opportunity. So, people look for making an argument either way. So obviously Elon Musk is an important
But his
entrepreneur.
partner is his partner's mother is Indian also.
So anyway, without getting into the personal aspects, that's not our work. And secondly, he himself said it's a private meeting. Beyond that, if you see Elon Musk in his various appearances, not only in the rallies, but even in the Oval Office,
Yeah.
along with President Trump, has been accompanied by a son. So, we should just let that be. The fact of the meeting is important because he has today an important
But what would the upshot have been of that meeting, Ambassador?
No, it's not a question of short. He's met the Prime Minister earlier. He's come to India earlier. He's met the Prime Minister. Prime Minister is in the US and he hears a very important, influential business person in the US. And so you meet him and then you figure out what is his interest in India? What does space again is a very important area for partnership. It was also came out in the initiative on critical and emerging technologies. And one of the sort of suggestions in that initiative was that in space, both countries should work together to bring the private sectors in US and India to do more together in space. And which is the most powerful player in the private sector in space in the United States today? It's Elon Musk and SpaceX. So those facts are out there. So there are many dimensions of what he is doing. And then, of course, you have issues related to battery technology, electric vehicles. So there are many aspects. And so it's not unusual for the Prime Minister to meet early. He also met Vivek Ramaswamy, leading business persons. So no, one should not get too much into the personal aspects of those things.
Yeah, well, I think there is a buzz about the fact that Starlink, which has played such a huge role in Ukraine as well, could make its advent in India. I mean, that would be very interesting to see how Prime Minister tackles the businessmen who would feel threatened by its entry into this country. I mean that's for sure. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in any of our minds. But this is also it's also interesting because of all the bonhomie, the personal bonhomie between that Modi has with various members of this Trump's administration. Do you think that will actually work to India's benefit, Ambassador? Because when you worked in Washington, it is more than policy. It's also the it's sort of the chemistry between India and Delhi and Washington that works in its favor.
Sure,
How
but
will that benefit us vis-a-vis the region? I mean, in the Middle East, we now have a position where we are caught between, Israel supporting Netanyahu and not being able to fully, back the Palestinian people on the two-state solution. Even though we say we support it, but we haven't actually done anything about it. About backing the two-state solution. And the same thing is true of Russia and Ukraine. We basically have said all the right things, but haven't actually stood up for, for whatever whatever India feels should be the right answer in solving the Russia-Ukraine standoff.
So I don't know whether I agree with you entirely, Nina, there, because on the Israel-Palestine issue, India's position is very clear. We support a two-state solution. And we have a very strong partnership with Israel. And keeping in mind our national interest, we want to consolidate the partnership. And we continue maintaining linkage with the Palestinian Authority. Similarly, on Russia, Ukraine, and the Prime Minister said that also in his press conference in Washington, that our position has been that this is not an era of war. This is time for diplomacy to resolve this issue. And India has articulated that. So you have to be mindful of what is your capacity to bring influence on a particular situation. And you have to only operate keeping in mind the limits of that capacity. So I think in that context, India is trying to navigate its way. And in terms of the personnel in the Trump administration, look, they will be working to advance America's interests. Now, since they've been exposed to India before, one can make the argument that they may have an understanding of India's compulsions and arguments, which very often many others in the US system who are not exposed to India will not have. For example, when India came under criticism in the US for our policy on Russia-Ukraine conflict, the then US Secretary of State said that we understand India's compulsions. India, the relationship it developed with Russia at a time when the US was not willing to be that kind of a partner. Now, he was somebody who's been exposed to India. If it was somebody else who was not exposed to India, they would have articulated differently. So I think having people in the Trump administration who had early exposures, not just Tulsi Gabbard at National Intelligence, but also the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. He was the co-chair of the India Caucus. And he had visited India. Last year on 15th August, he was present at the Red Fort when the Prime Minister was making his speech. So it makes a difference. They have a deeper understanding of India. But then we have to be mindful of the fact that they will not be advancing India's interests. They'll be advancing America's interests. And you have to work with that. But President Trump himself, in his first term, in 2019, he went to Houston for that Howdy Modi rally. And it's
Yes.
very unusual for a sitting US president to go for an event for a visiting foreign leader, and that too outside Washington. So it was a signal about how he saw his personal equation with Prime Minister Modi. But even more important, this was an outreach that he was doing to the Indian American community in the US to be able to get more votes, more funding for his election. And if you see the pattern, in 2016, 20% of Indian Americans voted for Trump. 2020, 30% of Indian Americans voted for Trump. And this time, 40% of Indian Americans voted for Trump. And in many battleground states, the size of the Indian American community is larger than the size by which the candidate is winning those states in presidential elections. So it's an important community, and the people are also looking at their political interest as they do these various engagements.
Now, that's a very interesting aspect of this whole thing. Maya, if I can come back to you on this, I forgot to, when you were brought up, Trump and Elon Musk. I also wanted to bring up this India Middle East corridor and I2U2 because that's something which has been there in every sort of agreement document. Is it really something that India can pursue in the India Middle East corridor? I mean, can it happen in the current context where the Palestinian state is in such turmoil? Israel is battling. I mean, even if Iran is a vastly diminished Iran, can it actually happen? Do you think it's something that could bring all these countries together?
I mean, to be honest, Reena, I think right now, given the state that most West Asian countries are in, it seems to me that this is just rhetoric. I mean, President Trump spoke on making Gaza Riviera that was going to
Yes.
be ruled by the Americans. I don't see how any right-thinking Indian leader can actually take a comment like that seriously and then talk about how to build a strategic corridor in the Middle East. I just don't. So I don't think that's even something that's going to be front and center or uppermost in the imagination right now. Syria is in a mess. The Palestine area, the entire Palestinian territories are in a crisis. The war shows no signs of really abating beyond a small ceasefire. The spillover effect happens in Egypt
No,
and
and
Jordan.
also Saudi Arabia and all of these
Yeah,
countries have
yeah.
clearly
So I
said
mean,
that
I
they're
think
not going to go ahead.
As far as UAE and Saudi Arabia and all are concerned, India is already charting its own course and its own relationship with those countries, which have been fairly stable over the last 10, 20 years, I think. But as far as working with the United States on a Middle East corridor, yes, it's a great idea in principle, but I think it's premature. Maybe I'm a minority, I don't know. Given the security situation and given the kind of conflicts we're seeing, I feel it's a conversation that they have because it's a cool conversation to have and it's a needed conversation, but it's not going anywhere, right? It's like, when we talk about uh, the the pipeline through Pakistan and Afghanistan and the roadways and the pipe.
Tappy.
I mean, yeah, they're great ideas. Of course, they're great ideas. Can they be implemented? No.
No, I think that's true. You're absolutely right. So, but this was only Modi's third direct press conference, is what in his almost 11 years, 10 years India's prime minister. He's never held a solo press conference. And in 2019, I know he sat with the party president Amit Shah, and Shah answered all the questions. So in when he was sitting next to Joe Biden, he took only two questions. Do you think this press conference, I mean, Prime Minister Modi be more open to press conferences at home, Maya? Because I mean, you've been a journalist, you know what it's like, and he did fob off that question on Gautam Adani, saying that this is not country to country relationships, and conversations shouldn't include conversations about A particular B.
Firstly, apologies about the barking. I can't help it. Somebody who rang the doorbell, and
That's
so
fine.
there's chaos. Secondly, I do think that it's interesting and it's a sign of the relationship that he and Donald Trump share that Prime Minister Modi's first ever press conference in 11 years as Prime Minister happened impromptu in the United States, standing next to Donald Trump. And it was an American journalist that asked that question. In fact, it was not a question that Prime Minister Modi was seemingly prepared to answer. And so, I wish he would just have more press conferences. I think it shows that he's willing to take questions. So why not just open it up to the Indian media? I mean, I think I got
And
the most
he has the knowledge and the confidence to tackle the press. And he's
absolutely.
done it
I
many
mean,
times
he's
before.
often talked about the ability to control the media, even in interviews. And I'm talking about going back to when he was chief minister of Gujarat as well.
Yeah,
So, I
exactly.
mean, I think if he was willing and able to take more questions, people would be more than happy about the idea. I think I wish it wasn't the case that he was doing this because the American president gave him no choice but to take questions. And that's what it
Yeah.
seemed like.
Yeah. Well, anyway, concluding remarks. I've only got 5 minutes left. So, in conclusion, was this India pandering big time to the world superpower, knowing it has no country to fall back on? Or was it the growing power of China, knowing that it has to have America watching its back? What would you say, Ambassador?
No, I don't think it was necessarily India pandering to great power. If you saw the various gestures that President Trump made, and I think in response to a question, he said Prime Minister Modi is a great negotiator, is a better
That's
negotiator than
true.
him. So no, I think it was a signal that they both have a good personal chemistry, and there are differences of positions and views. Second, both countries value the relationship. And obviously, for India, US is important. And I mentioned to you a very important comprehensive partner in terms of our comprehensive national security. But the US values the India relationship for the reasons that we've discussed. Otherwise, India would not have been among the first 4 countries to be invited to the White House. And President Trump had spoken to our Prime Minister after the election and also after being inaugurated. So that's the other dimension. And then if you look at the messages that have come out, there are 2 or 3 areas that they are emphasizing for this partnership. And right in the top of the joint statement, there's a new terminology that has come in called compact, catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce and technology. So that's the framing of
Very
the
long
relationship.
acronym.
So we will build a strong military partnership, and there are several suggestions there about what could be done. Do things to enhance trade, and they're now putting a target of $500 billion by 2030, and do more technology partnerships, because everybody was waiting to see whether a Trump administration would want to continue the kind of technology partnerships that were done in the Biden administration. And the signal is that they want to continue with that. So I think that's the message. And I think we have to absorb the fact that since 2000, through changes in American administration, from Democratic Bill Clinton, Republican Bush, Democratic Obama, Republican Trump, Democratic Biden, Republican Trump again, the relationship has only consolidated at each stage with an accelerating upward trajectory. So there is a broad convergence in our strategic interests as of now. And so with changes in administration and changes in government of India, that has been sustained. So I think we have to be mindful of that, and keeping that in mind, seize the opportunities that are there.
That's very well put. Maya Mirchandani, what would you have? What do you see as the biggest takeaway? And do you see this relationship getting stronger?
So I think it was a good sign that India was one of the first few invited to the White House. The diplomacy that took place to sort of lead up to this visit was evident and on display. But I do think that President Trump has a capacity to be somewhat unpredictable.
Irrational.
Yes, he is also driven by undoing things that, this whole draining the swamp kind of politics, undoing things that he feels the Democrats may have done, have an edge on. I do think that foreign policy sometimes is insulated from the vagaries of party politics, and so therefore there will be some amount of continuity, or one hopes there will be some amount of continuity. Ambassador Singh made the point that there are a lot of Indian Americans in the administration, or people who have been friends of India in the past, who will weigh in on some of these policies. In fact, I think Paul Kapoor has been made Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Yeah. So there are people who can advise him, but he seems to be the kind of guy who wakes up one morning and, for example, decides to sign an executive order banning paper straws. And I mean, you think about who is this person you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And I think given that aspect of his personality, India would be wise to, move cautiously, take things with a pinch of salt sometimes, not get too excited when he says something in praise, and by the same way, not get overly, upset when he sounds like he's taking India on. I think a lot of it is done for optics as well. And as I said, as I underscore time and time again, he's a businessman. You give him a deal that he can't say no to, and that's the only way to move forward with President Trump.
Yeah, he is the ultimate deal maker, there's no question. But I also like this comment that was written by the Congressional Research Service in a recent report, which says India is the world's ultimate swing state. And the course of the US-India partnership will be a determinant of 21st century global dynamic. I find that quite fascinating, actually, to see where India will take this relationship and where the US will, as you said, anything could happen. Thank
Yeah.
you, Ambassador Mr. Arun Singh, for coming on the show. Thank you, Maya Mirchandani, for all your wonderful insights. Thank you, viewers, for watching Global Express. Do click on the new Indian Express website and click and share Global Express.